Thank you very much, Olivier, and welcome everyone. And we are really happy that, in fact, the last panel at the second day of the conference rarely attracts such attention. So thanks for staying with us and to coming to the panel. We are having very distinguished guests today to discuss the topic of NATO and democracy. So the title of the panel is Defending Democracies, the Aftermath of the Madrid NATO Summit and the New Strategic Concept. And I would like to first introduce our speakers and then give the floor to the first speaker. So our first speaker will be Mircea Geoană, the Deputy Secretary General for NATO, who is joining us online. Dear, welcome, dear Deputy Secretary General. Also in the panel personally, we have from my right, Géza Jeszenszky, the first Foreign Minister of Democratic Hungary and former Ambassador of Hungary to the US and then to Norway and Iceland as well. He is also the former President of the Hungarian Atlantic Council. We also have from the Czech Republic, Andrea Michalcova, Deputy Director of the European Values Center for Security Policy, that is based in Prague. And also we have with us today Mrs. Siposné Klára Kecskeméthy, a colonel and military expert and professor at the University of Public Service. So first of all, Mr. Geoană, thanks again for being with us today, and you are talking to a quite numerous audience. And my first question would be something actual, and it would be just a question for you to say your opening remarks. Yes, we all see the tragic events unfolding in Russia with the partial mobilization, which seems to be even less partial if we take a look at the legal documents that are the foundations of that. So what is the response of NATO to this threat that has been also highlighted in the Madrid summit document? I mean, Russia as the major threat for the military alliance.
Thank you, Péter, and so good to see Géza Jeszenszky, my dear friend. So good to see you, and we have so many wonderful memories from our work in politics and diplomacy over the years. I want to say that Géza Jeszenszky is one of the leaders that transformed Central Europe, and is one of the champions of transatlantic and European integration for us. So Géza, I'm so happy to see you.
So am I.
Listen. We have 7 months already of the unconceivable war on European soil after so many decades. And probably not that much for the ones in Eastern Europe, because probably knowing Russia better from our history, we were probably a little bit more prepared for the revival of this imperial appetite of Russia. But for many in Western Europe, and also for many of our citizens, this was a major shock. And I want to put this atrocious war a little bit in context, and also to try to dissipate some of the propaganda and, let's say, to look into the mythology that the Kremlin is using in waging this war, and trying to transform this war into a war between Russia and the West, which is of course supporting Ukraine. Number one, in terms of international norms, Russia is a signatory to all the relevant documents confirming the fact that each nation in the world and in Europe has the freedom and the sovereign right to choose its own path. The Charter of the United Nations, the Charter of Paris, the documents that Russia signed with NATO, the NATO-Russia Founding Act, is explicitly saying that Russia is recognizing the right of European nations, including our nations that have been joining NATO in between, to join the alliance they wish. Yes, I remember we are running after the Americans to convince them to allow our countries into NATO. Nobody was forcing us to get into NATO or European Union for that matter. So basically the breach of international law is so blatant on behalf of Russia that I just cannot say how wrong this gesture is. The second part is about the war itself. Of course, Mr. Putin now is in a much weaker position domestically and internationally. The war is going bad for him. And for Russia, he's in fact recognizing de facto the fact that the special operation is in fact a war by mobilizing partially additional troops, which, by the way, will not probably that much because the logistics, the equipment, the morale of the existing Russian troops in Ukraine is so low, even if there will be some additional numbers, the quality and the motivation will be probably as low as the current one. The second thing is the atrocious, barbaric gestures against civilian population. More than 1 million Ukrainians have been deported. We thought that gulags will never come again. Not only war will not ever come again in Europe, but gulags. Again, gulags in 21st century in Europe, that's something unacceptable. Rape, filtration camps. And beyond the devastation of war, we are also seeing tremendous human suffering and tremendous economic and material losses for Ukraine. So what Mr. Putin has been saying yesterday is having NATO more united than ever. We are calm, we are determined. We knew that this escalation would come. And as Secretary General has said yesterday in one of his interviews at the General Assembly of the UN, we are also condemning forcefully the saber rattling with the nuclear rhetoric. And this is something that a major power, a nuclear power with experience in global affairs, in strategic affairs, Soviet Union, now Russia, they also carry an obligation not to misuse the rhetoric. In real terms, we are not seeing, and our intelligence is not indicating any change on the nuclear posture of Russia, level of alertness, or any significant moves. But this is strategic communication trying to influence the morale of the Ukrainians and the resolve of the West. This trick would not work. We'll continue to help Ukraine. It's a fight that they need our help. NATO is not a part of this conflict. We are very clear that NATO is not a co-belligerent to this conflict. And if you look to what NATO does as an organization, we are helping Ukraine in many ways, but nothing of the lethal aid, the military aid, which is done by allies and close to 50 allies and partners are providing in a different format outside of NATO, will continue as an organization and as allied nations and partners to help Ukraine prevail. Because in fact, it's about the future of democracy. It's about the future world order. Do we want to have the jungle or some form of predictable norms? So in a way, Ukraine is fighting, they're fighting for their own sovereignty and liberty, and I applaud their courage. I applaud the way in which they are behaving as a nation in these very difficult moments. But I also say that us, the supporters of Ukraine, are also doing a pretty good job in helping them and staying with them for the long haul. And I think in Hungary, a country that has such a important experience with lack of democracy, with 1956, with so many things that happened in our part of the world, I think people in Hungary and people in Central Europe and people in the Baltic region are understanding the value of democracy, the value of freedom, and also sometimes the temptations that do appear in this never-ending battering of our democracy, our freedoms, and the rule of law. Just one word about Sweden and Finland. We are exceptionally happy with the decision of these two invitees. We are hopeful that they will be joining our ranks in the near future. Of course, there are things that are done between Finland, Sweden, and Turkey bilaterally, but we are seeing with great pleasure the fact that now I think 25 national parliaments of the 30 who have ratified the accession of these two countries. So there will be a net added value to us, and not only in terms of defense and security, in terms of values, of real democracy, societal resilience, technological advance, and also an ethic of values, if you want, that will be bringing a lot more than just their size and geography to this alliance of ours. So 1 billion people, 32 nations, values, freedom, liberty, rule of law. This is what we are all about. And of course, common interest and defending each other against any enemy that might dare to challenge NATO.
Thank you very much. Do you happen to have time for 1-2 more questions, or you have to leave?
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Okay.
I'm not. Don't say I have a lot of time, but of course I will be happy to respond to.
Okay. Okay. Let me two short questions. One is that I would return a bit to the accession of Finland and Sweden, and yeah, this is absolutely a positive sign that it seems that NATO is just more attractive than ever before, because it seems like a really valuable club that more and more countries want to join in. From your optimistic words, it seemed that you are sure that the disagreement between Turkey and Sweden and Finland can be solved. Turkey is the country that is raising the most loud objections, but also there are some other countries that have not ratified yet the accession of these two countries, such as Hungary, Portugal, Slovakia, Spain. And Hungarian government thought, for example, that it is following the developments of the debate between Turkey and the new countries that want to join with a special attention. So how do you think that this debate can be solved, if you can go a bit into the details?
I said that I'm confident, we are confident here, and Secretary General Stoltenberg himself played personally as a leader a very important role in Madrid. You remember there were discussions about getting the status of invitees in Madrid. It was a major success, and Secretary General Stoltenberg, together with other leaders, played a personal role in Madrid itself before the summit started. And this is something that I believe will lead to a positive conclusion. Now, there is a memorandum signed by Sweden, Finland, and Turkey. For Turkey, the issue of terrorism is an existential problem to their national security. There's no other country in NATO, I don't know about the world, that has suffered more from terrorist attacks. And for them, this is a very important issue, and I want to make sure that new members into NATO will understand their problems and eventually cooperate together. The first senior level meeting of this working group established by the three players I have mentioned has already met. It is my understanding that the first conversation went relatively well, positive atmosphere. And also there is something that we have learned from our Swedish friends that just had elections, that the new government will keep in place a deputy foreign minister that was in charge from the previous Swedish government, and the same person will continue in a new government to be the interface in these very important things. Of course, that's also about intelligence, it's about Ministry of the Interior, it's about foreign ministries. So we know that dialogue will lead to a conclusion. For the rest of the nations that have not yet ratified, I think it's more of the nature of their constitutional procedures. So we hope that all 30 will be ratifying, and we'll see the two new proud members of NATO joining our ranks. So yes, I'm confident. Of course, I cannot give 100% blank check, but we are confident that they are engaging in earnest in this conversation, and we do hope that we fully understand the immense added value of these two countries to the security, not only of the Baltic Sea region, but also to the whole eastern flank, which is now in a way becoming something even more interesting. It's from the North Sea to the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. So that's a very important evolution in the strategic balance of Europe. So I think all allies from the eastern flank, from Turkey all the way to Norway, which is the northest of them all, do understand the importance of having a very solid eastern flank with Finland and Sweden completing this puzzle from the high north to the warm seas of the Mediterranean.
Thanks. And the last very short question. If Finland and Sweden succeeds to join, that we all hope, which countries you think could be the next? There has been some public discussions about some other countries where the NATO accession came up on the agenda, including Ireland, for example. Would you dare to name some other countries that could be the possible future members of NATO if these two countries have already joined?
I can only recommend a very interesting, important reading, and easy to read, which is the new NATO strategic concept, which was adopted in Madrid. And it's in itself, it's a very condensed document, which is charting the way forward for the alliance for the next decade or so. So there you'll see also the new definition of Russia in our assessment, the new definition of China. And also you see a reconfirmation of the open door policy. This is part of the Washington Treaty, which says very clearly that every nation, in our geography, of course, that contributes to our security and qualifies as a democracy can ask for joining NATO. And this is something that will continue. Open door is a fundamental piece of NATO's identity and our DNA. I cannot say which countries would be either ready or will be ready, because you need consensus. This is something that I just cannot identify names, but we have partners that have membership action plans with us in the Balkans, also in the Black Sea. There was a very interesting report by a group led by former Secretary General Rasmussen and the head of the presidential administration on what kind of guarantees could be identified for Ukraine, security guarantees in the future. So I just cannot say which nations, but I know one thing, that the matter of principle, the fundamental right of European nations to choose their own alliances and their own future will remain sacrosanct for NATO. Of course, this is also factored by many other considerations, but the principle is there, and our strategic concept is reconfirming the value and the importance of our policy of open doors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General. And we let you go because we know you are busy, but let's give an applause to Mr.
Thank you so much. And Géza, when you come to Brussels, please do see me, my friend.
Sorry?
When Jeszenszky visits Brussels, has an open invitation to have lunch and to visit with me.
Thank you very much for being with us, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Goodbye. I have to make a technical announcement at this point. Andrea and me have to catch a taxi to reach a flight to Prague in half an hour. So we will speed up the discussion, but at the same time, my colleague Rudolf Berkes will take over the moderation when we have to leave. So there will be a slight shift that you will recognize, but it does not stop the conversation. So let's jump to the discussion with the panelists here. I would like to turn to you, Mr. Jeszenszky, first. So you were feel free to reflect on the words of Mr. Geoană, but at the same time I would like to ask you that how would you evaluate the last more than 2 decades of Hungary's membership in the NATO? You were foreign minister when the negotiations have started, and you were also the ambassador to the US when Hungary joined the alliance. So how do you see Hungary's state in the NATO at these times that are rather challenging for the whole alliance on the one hand, but there are new debates emerging in Hungary as well?
Well, thank you very much, especially for the invitation, and I was very pleased to learn that here I will have a chance to meet, at least online, Mr. Geoană, Mircea, with whom I worked very closely when I was ambassador of Hungary and of the first Orbán government, and he was the ambassador of Romania. And
you can also go to a lunch to Brussels, as we heard. So.
Oh, well, yes, yes, indeed, yes. I may even say that one of his last evenings in Washington was spent at the Hungarian embassy. So it is so important that somebody from Central Europe, a neighbor of Hungary, Romania, was given this post, offered this post as Deputy Secretary General, because I think that he is obviously not representing only Romania, or not even personally, but really representing Central Europe, the new members. Actually, when we met in Washington, Romania was not yet a member, and Hungary was also a new member, and I, with other people, worked very closely and very hard for bringing other countries, including Slovenia, Romania, the Baltic states, and it was not an easy job. It was even more difficult than convincing the American Senate and the American decision makers of enlarging NATO with the 3 Visegrad countries, but finally we succeeded. And yes, as I said, I represented the first Orbán government, which was very pro-Atlantic, pro-Western at that time. Actually, soon after my arrival, Prime Minister Orbán was invited for a working visit, and half a year later, on April the 4th, but on the 50th anniversary of NATO, he and all other leaders attended this great celebration. So Hungary started very well as a NATO member, and actually this was a realization of an old dream of late Prime Minister Antal and myself. In 1992, it was at the Prague summit of the Visegrad countries that we announced, the Visegrad foreign ministers, that our intention is to apply for membership. And it took 7 years. And I have to mention here that why it took quite a long time to be admitted was just the very reason was Russia. And so contrary to the statement of President Putin and so many others, even some Americans and Europeans, it was not urged by the United States to bring in new allies, but actually they tried to slow down the process so as to be able to convince Russia and to carry out this enlargement, not against Russia, but in agreement with Russia. At that time, it was even a possibility, not a slight, but a real possibility that under Yeltsin, Russia might join NATO one day. So back to, well, how I see Hungary's 20 years or more. At first, I think that we continued to be, in many ways, a forerunner together with the other Visegrad countries. And as returning from my mission in Washington under a different government, which was elected in 2002, I continued to work for making the Hungarian public aware of the great significance of our membership. As I put it very very often, that Hungary will never face a kind of new Mohács when we lost against the Ottoman Empire and the country was divided into 3 parts. And also we will not have a Trianon when we lost so much territory. NATO is the best guarantee not only for Hungary but for all the members. And my final remark is that I think the accession or the 3 or later on other countries becoming members of NATO is more significant than many people at that time saw, because NATO obviously defended its early members during the Cold War from a possible Soviet invasion. So even for this, I think NATO deserves the Nobel Prize for Peace. But with the enlargement of the new members, I think the countries which had historical differences, quarrels, I think it is another reason for NATO to one day receive this Nobel Prize.
Thank you. Dear Ms. Kecskeméthy, I would turn to you now, and I raised the question for the Deputy Secretary General, on possible new hopeful members. I did not receive any response, so I try it with you as well. So yeah, as it was told in the Madrid summit, have reaffirmed the open door policy of NATO. Who do you think might be the next possible countries that join, if you see a chance? Please use the mic.
Especially after Deputy Secretary General, he gave us a very diplomatic answer. He mentioned principles to assume obligations and responsibilities if you would like to join NATO. May I ask you a question? May I pose you a question? What do you think? NATO is an exclusive club or an open community? I'm going to answer. It's an open community. We can see from the enlargement, different enlargement rounds, who would have thought just immediately after the bipolar world that countries from Central Europe, from Eastern Europe, from the Balkan region, they are going to join the alliance and being fully fledged members of NATO. Who would have thought just in 2008, when that time country's name was FYROM, former Yugoslav Republic, was left out of the enlargement rounds, and just Croatia and Albania joined the alliance, and they had to wait 20 years. Deputy Secretary General mentioned open door policy. It is exactly the Article 10, which says that you can invite, there are 3 stipulations, 3 requirements. You can invite European country by anonymous agreement. And the third point is very important, that they have to contribute to the Euro-Atlantic security, and not only to the security of the Euro-Atlantic region, but to their own region's security as well. You mentioned in your question Ireland. I would add that there is a very special term for 5 countries. We call them like-minded countries or Western 5 countries. Who do I mean? First and foremost, Sweden and Finland. Then I would add to the list Austria, Switzerland and Ireland. Nobody would question. They are having the same values as NATO is having: individual rights, liberty, human rights, democracy, and rule of law. Nobody would question that they are democracies. At this point, I would not dare to say that they are going to join, but I wouldn't exclude anything. Deputy Secretary General mentioned that there are countries who are having a very close relationship with NATO. And one country is inside, they are having a membership action plan. It's just the pre-step before joining NATO. But it does not prejudge being a membership action plan, the decision taken that they are going to join the alliance or not. We are talking about 3 countries we can mention. First and foremost, in the map section is the Bosnia and Herzegovina. Just last week I was privileged to have a discussion with the delegation coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I was very happy that they did not ask when we are going to join NATO. They posed a question: what should be done, what have to be done in order to meet all the obligations and requirements, what is needed to be able to join. And secondly, there was a famous, all NATO summits are famous, of course, but there was a famous summit in 2008, the Bucharest summit, and in the declaration, the 23rd bullet says that we are very happy that Georgia and Ukraine are on the right track in the Euro-Atlantic integration, and they will be NATO members. And from those time, each declaration and summit communique just reiterated that those countries are going to be NATO members. And even in the last strategic concept was highlighted in the cooperative security section that those countries are going to join. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Andrea, Ms. Michalcova, I would ask you a question that fits pretty much to the core of expertise at European Values. You are doing a lot of work uncovering Russian malign influence in NATO member states. According to a recently declassified document published by the US State Department, Russia has spent $300 million since 2014 to influence Western politics. Are these political maneuvers considered a threat by NATO, and can it defend against such authoritarian influence? So how do you see the role of NATO as such and member states in particular in defending themselves from this threat that is external but aims to exploit internal weaknesses, corruption, political divisions, but also pro-Russian sentiments in certain NATO member state societies?
So, as everyone can see, Russia is undermining democracies for years, and we, as European Values Center for Security Policy, are deep into this topic since, let's say, 2014, and we've done a lot of research on that. What I want to mention is that we can see really increasing destabilization in also our region. We can see that democracy is losing, also thanks to Russia, and it started with anti-COVID disinformation and even anti-Islamic movements and so on for years. We could see recently also in Prague a big demonstration. It was nearly 70,000 of people. And there are links to Russia, of course. The organizers of these demonstrations were often, claimed, again, as I mentioned, this anti-COVID disinformation spreading in the Czech Republic, using alternative pro-Kremlin media in the Czech Republic to spread the information. And actually, it was quite successful, and we could see that as a reaction of this demonstration, as I mentioned, it was 70,000 people who attended. It has like 1.8 million views, and it was disseminated by pro-Kremlin pro-Kremlin media like Raptor TV and famous Russian outlets like Zvezda or Rossiyska Gazeta. They were also reacting very quickly, immediately to this reaction, and it was, anti-Ukraine flows, anti-NATO, anti-EU, so really pro-Russian links. So this is only like one example of how Russia was systematically working in our region, in the whole Europe. And we can see it also in Hungary. For Hungary, the main threat at the moment is Viktor Orbán, who is proxy of Russia, proxy of China. And we, in the V4, we should really make some steps. And what I was talking to many of you for these 2 days, and there is lack of information, lack of acknowledgement of the threat Viktor Orbán is posing. I was happy that I could bring 2 Czech MPs from the Czech parliament, and they are really motivated to work on that, to talk to their colleagues and to spread the to spread the information and acknowledgement of what Viktor Orbán is doing in your country. And yeah, what else can be done? I think we should do the acknowledgement also among the other NATO states, V4 countries. The whole EU should be stronger, should have stronger reaction, and we need to put some consequences on the table. Political isolation of the Orbán's government. For example, intelligence shouldn't be shared within the NATO member states with Hungarian intelligence. There is a lot of what can be done, but really the first step is acknowledgement with the help of everyone in this room, also the civil society, journalists, political leadership. We should cooperate more on this topic. And yeah, so maybe this. And I just wanted to react also about the accession of Slovakia voting, because I'm a Slovak citizen as well, but I'm living in Prague for 12 years. We can see what is going on in Slovakia is really crazy. I don't have any other word right now. But the former Prime Minister Robert Fico, he is publicly acknowledging and praising Orbán. He's saying that Russian invasion to Ukraine was caused by the US, and it is a war of the United States and not of Russia, and that we shouldn't be meddling into this, and that the Slovak government shouldn't support ammunition of Ukraine, and should follow the Orbán's government example, which is really stressing me out. Also his cooperation with far-right extremists and so on. However, the political situation is not ideal even among the coalition. There is a scheduled voting in the Slovak parliament about the acquisition of the Sweden and Finland to NATO. I think it is on the program next Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm the final vote, or it's just will be the debate starting? It is starting. Mm-hmm. In the parliament. So it's in the agenda already. Mm-hmm. But I think, despite all this, that the parliament would vote in favor of that. You know, the parliament wasn't functioning for the last weeks very well. We have like 3 new ministers, new foreign minister, and the government is actually in the minority. And there were some obstructions in the parliament, so it couldn't work normally. Otherwise, it could be already, I think, approved. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Jeszenszky, following up on what Andrea has said, let's broaden the question a bit. It's the Madrid NATO summit, as well as, for example, the words of Deputy Secretary General, and all the NATO documents take it for granted that NATO is practically a club of like-minded countries that share some democratic values. Is it? Is it really? And let me just quote something from the declaration of the Madrid summit, from this document that all the member states have signed to. We are united in our commitment to democracy, individual liberty, human rights, and the rule of law. How much you think NATO is really united around these values? And in that respect, probably Hungary is not the most problematic in every sense.
Well, openly, I think no member would denounce or question these values and principles, and I deplore and I am really shocked that so many foreigners and quite a few Hungarians see and think that the present Hungarian government is not following really sincerely these principles, although they also pay lip service, so they signed this Madrid document. But especially recently with their dubious, if not open, dubious attitude, if not open support of Russia, and let's say claiming or saying that the sanctions do not work, which is absolutely not true, fortunately, and that there should be peace immediately. Well, how can we have peace immediately and when Russia still occupies such a large region of Ukraine and really plans to annex 1/5 of territory of Ukraine? So I think, obviously, all Hungarians who voted for NATO membership, 85% of the population, should remember, and also with our difficult history, we should know how valuable it is for us to be members of NATO, and of course, all those are the principles which both NATO and the European Union stands for. The Hungarian Atlantic Council, of which you mentioned, I was the president before I went to Washington, will have the 30th anniversary tomorrow. Well, I was not given a chance to address that body, and so I cannot argue there for what we have said, that, well, it is not the United States who really initiated or caused this war, but just the very opposite, and also that Hungary's position should be unequivocally supporting the independence of a neighbor, and thinking of 1956, how Hungary, who suffered the Soviet aggression, how Hungary can think in a different way, not giving full support to another country fighting for its very existence. So I only hope that the Hungarian parliament will be given the advice by the Prime Minister to support the accession of 2 new members. Actually, you probably saw the kind of cartoon that Putin deserves a special recognition as best salesman of NATO, because of these countries would have never joined NATO, at least in the foreseeable future, without this aggression. So let's speak and argue that the Hungarian parliament should also support these countries, especially with our special historical linguistic ties to Finland.
Yes, and the first reactions to the idea of the 2 countries are joining were rather positive from the Hungarian side, and then as the debate between Turkey and these countries have escalated, there has been more question marks emerging, but hopefully, it will be finally a support, and we can all hope that Mr. Geoană's optimistic statements will finally become reality. So let me turn to another topic now, which is like about the changing threats that NATO member states are facing these days. And Ms. Kecskeméthy, my question to you would be that how much the nature of these military threats are changing? In the last couple of months, for example, Iran has repeatedly attacked Albania, a NATO ally, in the cyberspace. And it happened to other countries several times as well. And military experts, I'm not one, are all saying that the nature of military threats are changing. If we look at Ukraine right now, we can see pretty much the classical approach. But in the everyday, apart from that, there are more and more hybrid threats that do not really fit into the classical categories of warfare. So what will the alliance, you think, will do to protect its members against such threats, and especially cyber attacks, but other kinds of hybrid threats as well? And can these incidents trigger an Article 5 response, for example?
First, about changing.
Please use the microphone.
First, about changing nature of military threats. Well, there is only one constant since the beginning of time, and it is change. And the nature of military threats have been evolving and have been changing. At the time when NATO was created and the Washington Treaty was signed, actually, and the most quoted article is Article 5, the collective defense. They did not think about cyberspace and did not mean about cyberspace, because the operational domain was just land, sea, and air. Mm-hmm. And as the nature of warfare has changed and evolved, in 2016, another domain was added to fall into the collective defense article, Article 5. This was the cyberspace. Mm-hmm. During the Warsaw Summit. It was declared. And 3 years later, at the London Summit, they added the so-called space. So actually, NATO is able to have multinational, joint and multi-domain operations to tackle. Article 5, that's a very good question, an easy one as well. Coming back to the Article 5, it says that one for all and all for one, but it has a stipulation that they are going to assist, including the use of armed forces. It does not merely involve only using armed forces or sending military units to be deployed. It's more about solidarity, which is one of the basic values of the alliance, and a possibility to assist and help the other attacked member countries. And if we remember correctly, there was just once in NATO's history that Article 5 was invoked after 9/11. So it is not an everyday business. And it is a major political decision, and all 30, right now we are 30, sooner we are becoming 32, all 30 member states have to agree upon that. And to add another thought, that it is a novelty, because in public media, they are tackling the invocation of Article 5 as kind of novelty. It is definitely not, because I just checked and I put together a chart. Even during the Yugoslav air campaign, NATO experienced the so-called cyber attack. Mm-hmm. Then the first document where it was added, it was 2002 during the Prague summit, when that was very important. Then the invocation actually never happened, because the alliance was targeted with hybrid threats, with cyber threats, but experienced. It is on a daily business, but never ever happened that the invocation of that article. And let me remind one lecture of Secretary General Stoltenberg. It was during the Cyber Defense Pledge Conference in Paris, and he was asked that, please, Secretary General, tell us what circumstances would NATO trigger Article 5 in case of cyber attack? And his answer sounded like this: we will see. And he added that the level of a cyber attack which would reach the threshold of triggering Article 5, it's intentionally is going to be vague. And the nature of the response as well, because of security reasons. But he added, that was the third point, that, of course, NATO, according to Article 5, is protecting people, defending territory, and safeguarding peace and security of the alliance. And also added that all range of tools can be applied, starting with diplomatic measures, economic sanctions, cyber responses. They can be defensive and they can be offensive as well. So that is my very short answer to that invocation.
Thank you. So the theoretic possibility is always there,
Yeah.
and NATO leaders remind us so. But we also have to add the difficulty of attribution in most of the cases of cyber attacks, which makes it a bit more difficult to trigger collective response if there is no smoking gun, which is usually the case in case of cyber attacks. Then it's more difficult to formulate a response. Andrea, you have a chance to give a short response to a last question before we have to stand up. My question would be that how much you think that all these Russian influences against NATO member states is successful in the sense that, for example, the public opinion in most of the NATO countries since the beginning of the invasion rather turned more pro-NATO. And as Mr. Jeszenszky said, Putin acts like a quite successful salesman for NATO, even within NATO as well. So how much you think the fight for hearts and minds is successful by Russia right now, that I think the most brutal face of the Putin regime is becoming visible for everyone?
I think Russia is still very successful because I will give you an example of against Slovakia, because from the V4 countries, Slovakia is I think, only country who is culturally and historically the most pro-Russian. Also culturally, I have to say.
Maybe with Bulgaria.
Yeah, maybe, but from the V4 countries.
From the V4 countries, sorry.
It's Slovakia.
Pan-Slavism.
Yes, yes, indeed, Pan-Slavism. We could see in the very recent polls, so after the invasion, of course, the numbers of people who said that, who turned away from Russia was getting higher. But now we can see these numbers decreasing, and it's also caused, of course, by the high energy prices, and that people are already tired of helping Ukrainians and helping Ukrainian refugees. We can see that in our region, in Czech Republic. Czech Republic has quite high number of Ukrainian refugees, and you can see it also on the streets that people are, and this will be much stronger narrative during the autumn, where it will be much more difficult for the governments in our region to stay in the power and to work normally. And recently in Slovakia, these polls, I think it was from the last week, that it showed that again the numbers of pro-Kremlin voices has risen quite a lot. It was nearly about 15-20%, which is still quite high. And I think also the main reason is, and this tendency could be in the whole European Union because of what I mentioned, energy prices and this Ukraine fatigue, and because it will be a long conflict, so the fatigue will come soon or later, and everyone has to pay their own bills, so of course people will look at it. But what I was about to say, that Russia has worked for years in the whole Europe. It's not only our region, but also Western region, meddling in elections, meddling in the democracies, and basically working on the destabilization of the societies. We can see it, for example, in the Czech Republic, that Russia really doesn't have to try hard, because already the Czech population, there is quite a number of Czechs spreading pro-Kremlin narratives. So Russia is still winning, unfortunately, on this front. And the one reason is also that the European governments really lack in the good strategic communication. UK, they are the leaders, I would say, in the whole Europe and Baltic states. But especially Central Europe and our region, that's a very sad story because even I will give you a short example from the Czech Republic. In February, the government office established a Stratcom unit, and it's September, and they haven't produced anything yet. And there was a lot of discussions like what to do, how to do it, and that every ministry should have its department of strategic communications, that the government office should be coordinating other ministries and so on. But really, still nothing is happening, which is a very sad story. And we are causing it, we are helping Russians, basically, with that.
Thank you. On this happy note, I would give the floor to my colleague Rudolf to collect questions and continue the discussions. Thank you for your attention. We are leaving now, but the conversation continues. Rudi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. So, do we have some questions for our great panelists who will remain? Okay, the gentleman back there, gentleman in front. And we will have time for one more question, so 3 in total. Okay, so the gentleman back there first.
So thank you. My name is Theodor Balázs, and my question would be if you see any threat in the case if someone like Trump could come back as president in the United States, and if you think that a European army would be a good idea, just for in a case like in this case. Thank you.
Okay, and for the other gentleman, please.
Hi, thank you. Nice to meet you. I'm also one of the speakers from Hong Kong and now based in the UK. I'm Simon. So my question is, as all of us would know that NATO will focus on Atlantic Relation and Security Alliance, but recently, especially the meeting, the summits in Madrid, the first time ever they talk about China. Then they said that is systematic challenges in South China Sea and even across the Taiwan Strait. So my question is, what do you think if NATO in the future would also involve in what happenings in Asia? Because NATO is supposed it be set up after World War II and supposed to safeguard the liberal world, a liberal order around the world. So as you can see, that in Asia, there has no very concrete security alliances over there. So it leaves a free hand to China to becoming a quite regional hegemonic power. So what do you think in the future NATO could do more in Asia? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. So, Mr. Jeszenszky, do you have a short comment on
I will
idea of questions?
answer the second question. Okay. So I am certainly very much interested also in this. I recall the late Secretary General Manfred Wörner, who said even before our accession that after the Cold War ended, NATO should either will go out of business or should go out, well, in Europe and even beyond. So I think that, yes, although NATO is meant to protect Europe, or rather the North Atlantic sphere as it was then, and the name also goes back to that. But the security and peace of Europe is really essential for all the European countries, and we may go beyond that. That world peace is depending not simply on Europe, but on all the other countries, not only on the Security Council members, and especially thinking of the present situation, we can see that a member of the Security Council is violating all the legal norms of international law. Now, China is certainly well seen by many people, leaders, well, experts, analysts, and including myself, as really not only a rising power, as a great threat to peace, not threat to the peace of Europe, but at least not on the short run, but to the neighbors. And we can see that the neighbors of China have very different political systems, different traditions, but they are united in what I may say, fear of China. And if China were simply a peaceful power intent on growing and making its large population prosperous and so on, that would be commendable and everybody would welcome it. But how much China spends on weapons, not only traditional weapons, but also on space. And especially nowadays, but actually the last few years, it increased its rhetorics about Taiwan. And many people see a kind of parallel, or at least the danger of a parallel, that if Russia can attack Ukraine and thinks it can win, Taiwan, which has openly claimed that Taiwan regards Taiwan as part of China and does not recognize the right of self-determination for China, then the threat is even more direct. But here the Ukrainian war is also a kind of warning, probably for China as well. So Russia's plans and hope for overrunning Ukraine in a few days and installing a puppet government failed miserably and happily. So China probably thinks twice now about really, well, contemplating or even starting a war against Taiwan. So this is the case where not only Asians, but Europeans and other countries, Americans, should be on the watch. And NATO in itself is not well, a challenge or not an adversary to China. But if NATO can prove its value in Europe, including in this war, I think that would be the best hope or even guarantee that China will not attempt a new war in Asia. And of course, India and other Asian countries also seeing what goes on in Ukraine are probably moving away from this non-committal, non-aligned attitude, third world attitude, but and especially moving away from a pro-Russian line.
Ms. Kecskeméthy? To either questions.
Let me try to tackle the first question, if I may. Well, it has a strong correlation, in my view, the then president and the defense expenditure of NATO nations. Let me remind you that in 2014, at the Wales summit, there was a suggestion that each member state should spend as a minimum, or they should strive for reaching the 2% ceiling within 10 years. And Hungary as well promised, and you can see that we are on the right track. Then when the American president came into power, it first appeared in NATO circles at the summit, and he had some interviews and he mentioned that NATO is outdated. And America spends more than the rest of the NATO allies altogether. So he highly criticized, anyway, NATO countries and urged them to spend more on defense expenditure. And then there was a French president who mentioned that NATO is brain dead. And this helped the process because in 2019 December, the Secretary General was told that he should call the so-called reflection group. And the reflection group, 10 wise people, altogether, they put together the NATO report, NATO 2030, how NATO is going to look like. And that was a very important document, a pre-document before the strategic concept. So we have to be grateful for those two person that they mentioned outdated and brain dead. Now, the Secretary General had a press conference, and he mentioned that the 2% is not anymore a ceiling, but it's just a floor, and we should strive. I mean, Hungary and all the rest of NATO nations higher and spend more and strengthen defense and deterrence capabilities of NATO. So that is, in my view, it is of utmost importance.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Because if not, I think we are right on time to finish this great panel discussion. So I would like to thank our sponsor, NATO Public Diplomacy Division, for its generous support. And I would also thank our great panelists for being here and to answer our questions. Thank you very much.